Etiquette. Etiquette is a word of some significance in traditional Japanese martial arts especially, but it's often misunderstood, and I wanted to spend some time on it because there's a lot of really interesting stuff buried in it. The word itself in Japanese is reigi. Rei means appreciation, and gi means ceremony. So ceremonies of appreciation, specifically for your situation, the material of your situation, the clothing and implements, the space, the people in the space, the relationship between the people in the space. Right? So the ceremonies of appreciating your actual physical context. And temporal context as well in time is what etiquette is about. The saying that goes with the study of etiquette in the dojos is that etiquette is self-defense and self-defense is etiquette. So maybe we need to adjust the translation a little bit to something like correct behavior is self-defense and self-defense is correct behavior, or appreciation for your situation is self-defense, and self-defense is appreciation for your situation. There are a lot of small ceremonies of appreciation which make up entering a dojo, how to bow, how to put a sword away, or how to open a door, that are kind of formal. And one of the great strengths of Japanese culture, I think, is not the technique per se. One of the great strengths of Japanese culture is memory, the way things are remembered. You can see that in the coronavirus now. There seems to be a certain amount of irritation with masks that I read about in the newspaper that Japanese people don't have, because encoded in the culture since the Spanish flu 100 years ago is, if you have a cold, wear a mask to protect the people around you. That's just been remembered, culturally speaking, remembered. It's a piece of reigi, an appreciation of the materiality of your situation and its implications. If somebody is sick, protect the people around you with a mask is a thing that was learnt in the Spanish flu and consequently is still part of people's thinking, and so there's much less resistance to it. I'm sure there'll be more things learned from this pandemic, which will hopefully be encoded, but the manner in which they're encoded is in things like etiquette, these interpersonal and interspatial ceremonies. And they are worldwide, everybody does it, but not everybody does it as precisely as you find in the formal arts of the dojo. So I have a few things to say about it. One is sometimes there's a danger of getting all costume play, pretending to be 18th century warriors kind of about it, and that is a surface layer of some of these things, and it's not a bad thing. You get into a thing however you get into it. However, every dojo that I've ever been to had completely different reigi, and different arts have different etiquette as well. And usually, although the details were completely different and therefore you couldn't transpose them from one to the other, the thinking behind them was often very, very similar. Differences between dojos often depended upon when the dojo was formalized, what era it came from, and what the different teachers and the school itself thought was important to teach and pass on. But the thinking was often uniform. Some modern ideas about or approaching what was meant by etiquette are things like situational awareness, right, which is a modern kind of idea, I think, from the military. And that's part of what is meant by dojo etiquette. But it's not the entirety of the subject by any means. Other aspects of etiquette, when you step outside dojos into the tea world or the flower arranging world, they also have very complicated etiquette. And if if Budo etiquette's about safety, and then they're about hospitality or aesthetics and beauty and presentation, then you can see that the technique of etiquette is quite malleable. You can use it to teach many, many things without saying things or defining them or articulating them, simply by arranging behavior in a certain way. If you arrange behavior in a certain way and people practice it, they begin to cultivate certain internal reactions to the world, which are useful, which are part of what is being passed on in dojos, right? And it's not the specifics of always bow in this way or always tie your belt in this way. It's the thinking that led to the creation of that piece of etiquette, which is what you were wishing to cultivate, extract, and rebuild in your own context, in the context of a modern European or American or African or Russian or whatever. So some examples of etiquette, or some of the ideas of etiquette that I would like to touch on. So yeah, situational intelligence. An example of situational intelligence in the modern sense, because I think it's good reiki, is something I read recently. Someone recommended a book to me, which I haven't read, so take this with a grain of salt. I don't have the means at the moment to be buying books, but I think it was called Left of Bang, and the example he quoted to me of some of the information contained in this book, which is a military book about lessons learned from like Iraq and Afghanistan, was when you move into a new situation, learn what normal is there. When 3 or 4 abnormal things occur, immediately get out of there. So for example, if in the context of the place you are, it's normal for everybody to be going north to south down this street at 5 o'clock, and today they're going south to north, that's an abnormality. If it's normal for everybody to be wearing hats, and today nobody's wearing a hat, that's an abnormality. If it's normal for it to be very, very noisy, and today it's quiet, that's an abnormality. That's 3 abnormalities. Get out of there, right? So that kind of thinking and that kind of action is what is meant by etiquette, right? Interaction with the world. Another aspect of etiquette is what some of the military members of my dojo referred to, I think, as the Book of Blood, a military term, for the protocols for interacting with machinery and weapons and so on in the armed forces. And it's called the Book of Blood because each of the steps in these protocols are there because somebody died, right? Getting off an aeroplane or getting off a boat or doing something with a weapon. And so the protocol, the Book of Blood, is the received wisdom of your ancestors being passed down, and that is part of what etiquette is. A third aspect of etiquette is what I think of as studying and refining your physical sense of the world, right? An example of that from my own life is I had a friend in the Hozo Inryu, the spear fighting style from Nara, and they wear their hakama pulled up at the sides. And I asked him why they did that, and he said, well, one reason is because we have very low stances, a practical reason. The other reason, however, is if you do it, and he asked me to do it, he said, when I do this, there's a kind of anxiety which leaves me, that I will catch my feet in my hakama and trip and fall, right? And as I did it, I thought, oh yeah, there is a kind of cloud which dispersed in my physical sense, a worry which passed, right? And so this is the influence of your physical environment, your things, and how you are relating to them, how you are using them, on your sensed experience of the world. And this is a part of Reiki as well, and what it's trying to teach you. So in the tea ceremony, this sense is cultivated. You are in this room, It has rectangular tatami mats. You are serving tea and engaging in conversation and presenting sweets and so on. And one of the background rules of that, I think all the schools, certainly the Urasenke school, is that you don't step on the joins of the tatami. So that sounds like an arbitrary rule, but what it does, right? It's etiquette, right? Don't do that. It forces you to be very aware of your environment. And that awareness starts to sink into your whole body, such that quite senior tea people just never do that. They physically feel their environment in such a way that they're aware of where the tatami are, this kind of background detail. And the kind of sensitivity to environment that is being cultivated there and put in the service of hospitality is part of what is meant by etiquette, right? Or the usefulness of etiquette. Another example, I mean, there's a lot of examples of this, of the influence of the world on you and you on the world, and the fine tuning of that. Morally as well, one of the correct etiquette in my dojos, my sensei's dojo, was that when you lined up in the dojo at the beginning of class to bow and at the end of the class before you left, you did so in order of seniority, meaning specifically the order in which you came into the dojo. So if you came in one day before somebody else, you were their senior and received a kind of formal respect, right? And so notably, this is not in order of rank, it is not in order of talent, it is not in order of like respect or dangerousness, it's simply in order that you entered the dojo. And so what effect does that piece of reiki have on you? What is being cultivated? What is being studied? What is being developed without words by that simple act of lining up in that way? And there's a bunch of things, but two that easily spring to mind is if you do that and time passes, then the ordering gets completely out of tune with talent, and so you'll be sitting there, and rank too, and you'll be a strong, powerful, skilled yondan, and the person to your right, to whom you perform formal, respectful gestures, is a 70-year-old shodan woman who comes once a week and is very forgetful about the details of technique. And the person below you maybe is sandan who's getting better than you, right? And so you're in this situation between these two people where one you are formally required to be respectful of, but maybe, especially when you're younger, you don't respect because they're not that good, and the other person is edging into your territory and causing a certain amount of competitiveness perhaps. And so just being lined up in that situation becomes a form of self-study to know that you are competitive with this person or contemptuous of that person. And then there are specific lessons being taught as well by that. The reason the person above me is not as good as me is because they don't practice as much, generally speaking, right? So what this shape is telling them is work harder. You need to train more. You need to, this person pushing at you requires you to do more effort, to make more effort, right? And then in the opposite direction, if the person, from my perspective, if the person above me is not as skillful as me, what that's teaching me is being skillful is not that important. The reason she's not as skillful as you is because she has a life. She's raised four children and is running a business or something, right? And so respect is not dependent upon your skill at breaking arms. That's not a good measure of humanity. And when you are being respectful to her, you are cultivating humility. That simply being good at something is not as important as being a good human, right? And so on the one hand, I'm learning work harder, and on the other hand, I'm learning be respectful and cultivate humility. All of which is taught with no no words being said, no lectures being given. The shape is teaching you things. And fine-tuning the shape is teaching you things. Yeah. So there's a lot of these kind of incidents just purely from my own experience about Reiki and its effects to fine-tune your sense of physical response to the world, to understand that your body is talking to you about your environment and to listen to it, to understand that the shape you are in is trying to teach you moral and ethical lessons, or lessons of respect. I'll give another example from my sensei's repertoire about dangerousness too, because one of the dangers that people have with this is they become paranoid, right? They become overly obsessed in safety because, the etiquette suggests you should try and be safe all the time, and then you stop having friends because you're so safety obsessed. And so one of Sensei's examples was of being in a room with armed men, or women, I guess, armed people, and you have to cross the room to go out the door over there, and so there's a man sitting in front of you, and you have to go past him, and so you have a choice. Do you walk in front of him, or do you walk behind him? If you walk in front of him, as you go past him, he'll come into your peripheral vision, then into your blind spot. At that point, he can attack you, right? You'll be standing, he'll be seated perhaps, so you would have a tactical advantage, but he's in your blind spot, which means his is greater, he can attack you and kill you. Therefore, safety suggests go behind. However, my sensei would argue, if you go behind, you are taking too dominant a position. Now you're entirely in his blind spot and you have the tactical advantage of being standing, which means that if he has any sense at all, he will immediately turn and attack you. Right? The fact that you tried to be too dominant has forced him to initiate a violent exchange simply because he's not willing to put his life in your hands, the hands of somebody he doesn't know, right? Therefore, my sensei would argue, correct etiquette is to walk in front of the person. And as you get to the blind spot, turn your head to look at them and say, he would always make this hand gesture, cutting, right? Excuse my rudeness, as you walk through the blind spot and then step out of range, right? And so you are taking care of the safety issue without taking such a dominant position that it forces people to take measures against you, right? And so you can see the narrow space there, and the thinking of what is being cultivated in you is not a sense of trying to be dominant all the time, nor is it a sense of just hoping things go well. It's a cultivated sense of what is correct and appropriate behavior. And cultivating that sense and then practicing it is Reiki's point. Every situation will be different, right? But that mistake is one that you commonly see, people trying to be too strong, and therefore everybody else in the room kind of ganging up against them because they think, who is this weirdo sitting in the corner scowling at everybody, right? Or being too weak and attracting predatory behavior. And so finding that space is one of the lessons of formal etiquette in the dojo. And you can see also that is skipping precisely around the problem of becoming paranoid. If you practice walking through rooms in that manner, then you will begin to cultivate this sense of felt safety that includes the safety of the people around you and not pushing people into areas where they have no choice but to become aggressive and not attracting aggression by being too weak, right? And so that, it's good etiquette, right? I wanted to also to say just something about, to counteract the kind of Japonism tendency which sometimes can creep into these things, which is that good etiquette is universal. It exists everywhere. And an example I wanted to quote was of confession in the Catholic Church. I was raised Catholic, right? And so the Catholic Church is less concerned with physical safety and more concerned with developing a moral nature, right? And confession is a piece of etiquette, yeah, an appreciation ceremony, which seems specifically designed to cultivate a moral nature. You go to a priest and confess your failures of behavior, and he gives you a penance and absolves you of your sins, and you go away and come back next week. And this repeated activity is like a feedback machine, biofeedback, right? Slowly developing in you a sense for good and bad behavior, which over the course of 40 years creates a sense of a moral nature. Yeah, that's really good etiquette, in my opinion. That arrangement of behaviors which cultivates something. And if you do that, you don't need any theology or Jesuitical arguments or deep Bible study to be altered in a good way by this simple arrangement of behaviors and interactions with the people around you in a certain context, which is good etiquette. Although some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about in the future might seem very like exotic, the point of it is the cultivation. Many kinds of cultivation of a background sense of awareness of your actual physical context, cultivation of the way your clothing and implements and materia affects your mind and mood and physical sense of the world, the long-term effects of cultivation of character that comes from the way things are arranged, and you can begin to develop your own like kinds of etiquette then, depending on what it is you wish to cultivate in your life. What arrangements of behavior lead to a sense of gratitude? What arrangements of behavior lead to a sense of safety? What kinds of material surroundings cultivate a sense of aesthetic pleasure, or hospitality, or inclusiveness to the people around you? And not just like I am going to be inclusive, but what like arrangements of behavior and physical material does that?